let me just begin by welcoming our audience to today's webinar, which is Plan for Impact. Together we can rise. My name is Sharad Agarwal. I wear two hats. I'm the CEO of Cybergear and also the founder of onlywebinars.com. Onlywebinars.com is a platform we built for having engaging conversations such as these. Today, I'm also joined by 5 other amazing panelists, and I'm going to very quickly introduce you to each one of them, and later I'll give them a chance to reintroduce themselves by telling their stories or sharing their stories with you. So we have 2 doctors in the house, by the way, Dr. Annalisa and Dr. Rihan. So you know we have an illustrious panel. So Dr. Annalisa is based in the US. She is the founder architect of yourglobalvillage.com, which is a platform that enables profitable and personalized community building. She's also the founder of Insight, which is a dedicated organization that provides practical data insights to SMEs. Next on, I have Paul Dunn. I believe he's coming in from Singapore. Paul is the co-founder of B1G1. Hi, Paul. So he runs a business for good. It's a global giving initiative, and he has already created millions of giving impacts globally. I'll let him expand on that just in a bit. Next on, I have John Scott Turco, based in New York, runs in his own organization. It's called Humanix. He's a thought leader, a change maker, again, wears many hats, and he coaches CEOs on leadership and has been doing this for more than 15 years. Next on, I have Philip Horvath, who's coming in from Berlin, a man who's always on the move. Last time he came in, I remember, like 3 a.m. from Los Angeles. So this time, I think suits Philip better. So Philip is the founder of Human. He's also a change maker, and he helps startups, NGOs, artists, futurists, and scientists to understand the values and behaviors. And he's very big on culture. So if you need any advice on how your organization can lead, he's your man. And last but not the least, Dr. Rihan Kroc, who's joining us from the UK. And she's an independent children's rights advisor with a doctorate from Hillary Rodham Clinton School of Law. So I welcome all our panelists. I know you have great stories to tell. And I would like to initiate today's conversation by a quote from Tony Robbins. He's a guy I've been following over the years, and I love what he says and I love what he does. So let me just kickstart by what he said. He says, "What you get will never make you happy in the long term. Who you become and what you contribute will." I think today's topic is about this. And I'd like Annalisa to kick off today's proceedings by sharing with us, Annalisa, how you are trying to make a difference while you are building your community. Over to you, Annalisa.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Sharad, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to be here again for our second fireside chat. So I'd like to pick up on what Sharad has said here on that quote from Tony Robbins. What stood out for me in that quote is who you become. And just to give you a little bit more of my background, I think there are 2 things that shaped who I became and who I am today. And the one is that I've been trained in economics, specifically in the field of development economics with a focus on gender studies. And that has given me a bit of an analytical view of how things work in the world. And I've brought that into what I do now. The second thing that I think has shaped me is the fact that I think I consider myself a multinational in that I've lived, worked, created communities, created friendships in about, seven countries now. And that gives you a whole new perspective if you start really digging into different cultures, different ways of doing things. And I've brought this together in is a metaverse for entrepreneurs called Your Global Village. And it is shaped and it is formed around the concept of an ancient village. And that I chose that concept of the village very intentionally, because what we create in that village is a place of safety, as well as a place where we have a very tight-knit community. And we use that village concept to help others to rise in various ways. One of the ways that we do it is to really position them and promote them. Second way is to create the collaborations and the connections. And most importantly, perhaps, is we help them to amplify the impact that they have individually, but also as a collective within our village. And it is guided by the Impact House. And that's why I'm so thrilled to have Paul here, because Paul is actually the patron of our Impact House, specifically because of the work that he's done in the world of creating impact. So that's how we are helping others to rise in our community, not just within our community, but also using that collective to create that ripple effect outside of the village, to see how we can really spread that. So I think I'd like to hand over to Paul at this point, because this is such a great introduction. Paul, you connected with us, so I think it would be great if you tell everybody about the work that you've been doing.
Sure. Well, thanks, Annalise, and welcome everybody from wherever you are. I'm here live. Yes, it's true, live in Singapore. And I did something kind of weird today because in a couple of days, it's my 78th birthday, actually. And, you know, you're supposed to celebrate birthdays. And I decided, why not celebrate every day? So I have an announcement, Shabbat, just really quickly. As of right now, I am 28,484 days, 12 hours, 7 minutes, and 53 seconds old. So I think that's worth celebrating. So what that also means is my story is long. So I'm going to keep it really, really short. Impact is a very important word for me. And really, it hit me in 2007. When one of the people I was mentoring said, can you just imagine a world where every time business was done, something great happened in our world? And just think about that for just for a moment. Like, for example, here we are on Zoom. Just because we're on Zoom, 11 kids are getting access to education, just because of these tiny little things that we're doing. And as of right now, we have created some 264 million odd. I much prefer to say more than 250 million. Actually, it sounds much bigger, giving impacts in our world. And the reason that's really important as well is because very often, you know, there's a lot of stuff going around about being purpose-driven, purpose-led, and all that sort of thing. One of the possible challenges with that is purpose can just be a really nice collection of words. That's one of the possible issues with that. And so when we lift that up to not think about, although purpose is critically important, but then when we give it another lift and say, well, okay, let's move from purpose to really existing to create impacts in our communities and the world and so on, then my experience is that everything changes. And that's one of the reasons why I'm thrilled to be here, because that's what happens when we get together here. So thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I'm going to pass.
Oh, you want me to pass to someone? Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Well, he's probably the furthest from me right now. So why don't we go? Oh, no, Philip, you and I were talking about the fact that you have a new chancellor today, yes, in Germany.
Another piece. I was thinking Paul, Philip, politics, purpose, planet, you know what I mean? And I really like purposes, you know, dolphins are some of my favorite animals. But, you know, I think if I'm going to take it with the planet word, I think this is one of the key things. And I think you've already hinted on that a couple of times a little bit. And when I was a kid, I kind of saw this planet Earth from space. And I was like, dude, we're on one planet and I'm alone. And there's this whole in between me and this whole planet thing and all this life in between. And this all seems to be life. And life seems to be becoming. I'm still coming back to that quote from Tony Robbins. And for me, becoming was around sort of the reflection, like I always say, that this masculine and feminine path, where like the masculine path was looking into technology, right? Looking into the systems and how we structure things and how life structures itself and what frameworks we can see there. And then the feminine part was to say, yeah, that's all nice and dandy, but experience it, please, right? Like, what does it feel like? What does it mean to have these things? And what does it mean to be alive, right? And so I'm kind of looking at life right now, where when we talk about culture, right? Culture is something that's cultured, comes from agriculture. It's what we practice and what we become and what we create the conditions for becoming. And so I kind of focus on really looking at this idea of everything's a system, and I'm a system as part of a superorganism that is life, right? And in the system, stuff goes in, stuff goes on, and stuff comes out. And for the last 100 years, it seems we've kind of focused on the stuff that goes in, right? Consumption and maximize me and supersize me and more in. And we haven't really worried so much about the out, right? In terms of, but our life seems to put more out than it consumes. So I think, really it's about shifting back into this, how can we be conscious part of life again, right? And conscious part of creation again. And from the individual to how we do that together in the superorganism, where we all have our pieces and roles to play and bring our individuality to it. And, have the collective environments where that makes sense and where we have cultures and leaders, and maybe I'll pass it on to John Scott on that note in terms of leadership and really teaching leaders to understand that when you create a business, you are creating a superorganism for life, and it should produce profit in the widest sense, not just measured in KPIs and monetary things, but really be part of life and procreate life and create more, right? Become more and help us all become more. So I'll pass it to the leadership.
So cool.
Yeah, it's great, and I appreciate everything that's been spoken so far. And I think, when it comes to leadership, I think there's an interesting shift that's happened over the last 2 years. Much of it positive, in the sense that looking at things from a collective perspective, from the we, as you said, from the singularity of us all together, has been a bit more adopted from people who I would have never imagined truly a few years ago would be open to the concept and understand that there's no work and then life and then the planet and then this. It's all an amalgamation of everything, interdependent, as you said, in this organism. So I believe there's a shift in consciousness, which I think is tremendous. So a shift in global consciousness, a shift that's making its way to the business world in a really meaningful sense, in the sense that people are looking at their team, their impact is globally, and looking at it all collectively, and being more open to inputs from their teams, suppliers, vendors, stakeholders, internal and external. So I really see this as a catalyst moment. I'd be curious to pass it over to Rian to give her perspective as well.
Right on, John Scott. Great.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you so much, Sharon, for inviting me to this webinar today. It really is a privilege to be here. So as Sharon said earlier, I have a long history of advocating for the human rights of children. I'm currently acting as an independent children's rights consultant, advising organisations on how to better embed a children's rights perspective in the work that they do. So when I consider the topic of discussion today, Together We Will Rise, I consider the importance of leaving no one behind. And this most importantly includes children. So children, they don't have the right to vote or the same opportunities to influence the corridors of power or change things in the way that adults do. So it's critically important that we represent their interests and empower children themselves to be able to speak out and claim their human rights. And with two global emergencies currently happening simultaneously in terms of COVID-19 and the climate emergency, now more than ever, we must really rise together to try to affect positive change for each other, our children, and our fragile planet. And in a recent research I've undertaken, it is evident that many children globally are not faring well in the context of both emergencies, with many of their human rights being breached. So so I've been advocating with governments, international institutions and private sector organisations to consider all their decisions and their actions through a children's rights lens. And this can truly have positive outcomes for children and the adults they will become, as well as future generations. I've developed a children's rights way of thinking and principled and practical framework to help organisations better embed their children's rights. And this has recently been adopted by governments and public bodies all across Wales, also 43 children's ombudspersons across Europe, and it's recently been advocated with the Director General at the United Nations. So I believe sharing within and across communities can have a real positive ripple effect to influence what is happening across the corners of the globe, creating positive change for all our children and ourselves as well, working collectively across sectors. So it really is a pleasure to be here today, Sharon, and I really look forward to being inspired by the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rian. And while we were just discussing a few minutes back that there's always, various top 100 CEOs list that comes out from Forbes and other organizations around the world. And they are largely based on, the incomes of these CEOs, and it goes like top 100 CEOs on the planet. So my mind says that we should work on building a top 100 CEOs list in terms of what they are giving back to society, ranking CEOs on their social responsibilities rather than just, what they create. So I'd love to get John Scott's, thought process on this. Should leaders be judged more in today's environment, especially after COVID, where we judge people more on what they are doing for society rather than just what they are doing for their own organizations? John Scott?
It's interesting, Sharad. I don't think that it's a question of, I think it's happening. I think that it's happening from communities, it's happening from employees and leaders. People are looking much more critically at where they work, how they work, with whom they do business. And on a macro sense, to Annelise's point, in the meta of this, really, what is the reason for being? Like, what is our reason for going to work every day, literally to work every day? What is our mission when we're there? What is the company's real impact and footprint? Many years ago, a colleague of mine and I got a patent for the Energy Efficiency Index, an EIN, which we have. It was an algorithm that took organizations and their carbon footprint and what their gross revenues were and their EBITDA was, and put it through some kind of pressure cooker and came out with a score. And the concept behind it is that people are looking at financial performance, but they also want to see what are the environmental impacts, what are the long-standing efficiencies that they're working with. And I think that leaders have no choice but to look at this in a holistic perspective, or they risk alienating any of their team who's working from a conscious perspective and looking at the collective and the together we rise perspective that we're talking about today. I think it's an absolute essential leadership vector to consider and to make a priority. So I'm curious, Philip, what do you think about this from a cultural perspective as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this has been, you're absolutely right. I think it's been happening, right? I mean, we were getting used to the idea of transparency, which was a trend that was there even before COVID, right? And that's just been accelerated by COVID. And transparency in the sense of we see each other now, right? I mean, Google knows where you've been and has its little devices, and we have sensors, and we see financial performance of an organization, and we see impact of an performance, and we see each other, right? And so I think both from the input of an organization in terms of the employer branding, right, the best talent is going somewhere where they can do something meaningful, and they're not going to just go somewhere purely for money reasons in the future, right? So there's been a shift there. And on the other side, of the consumer side, people are more and more conscious of the products that they're buying, the companies that they're supporting with their dollars, right? And so from both sides, that is becoming visible. And I think it's a natural thing that in the donut model and the ESGs and things like that has been rising in consciously, continuously going in that direction. And I think in the future, it's going to be a bit more of a very simple question. Are you like pro-life or contra-life, right? Are you adding to life of your company in terms of, and not need to, bring up that other conversation, but in the sense of, is your company actually forwarding life on this planet, preparing a future for our children, right? And I think it's so beautiful that you're looking at children. And often Paul talked about the aging. One of the coolest things I know about aging now that is you can look back and like 20 years happen really fast. Right? And from 20 years from a baby to a human that's actually participating in society doesn't take very long, right? And what kind of conditions are we creating for this next generation, right? And really, if our collective focus was on creating a world where every child has all the resources to unfold themselves to their highest potential and has loving and forwarding relationships and gets to work in service to life, if we are collectively focused towards that, then our organizations take different shapes as well, and our consumption behaviors take different shapes as well, and the work behaviors. So I think this is where the business culture just simply reflects our orientation towards that. So I think, Rian, thank you so much for working with children, because I think that is the goal line. Right, is to really say, how can we orient everything towards the next generation?
Yeah,
Paul,
that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Well, I was just saying, it's very powerful, John Scott, and very, very powerful. And with many of the leaders that I'm talking with, and particularly interesting enough, I think you're right that, you know, so much is taking hold now. And of course, things like COP26 have brought that even more alive. And afterwards, after that, there's a huge, I can only describe it as a huge uptick where leaders are saying, you know what, my 9-year-old came home today and said, will we still be here in a few years? You know, and so kids really get it. It's that beautiful innocence that kids have. And I think they get it, and they are influencing. Isn't that interesting? They're actually influencing the leaders by asking a simple question like that. So I think, Philip, you're right. It's where the kids are. Exactly right. So and the more they are together, and then the better it will be, I think. And you know, I think it was Paul Polman who wrote that some of the economists now would actually be happily marching with Greta Thunberg in Glasgow, because what we're now understanding is that, you know, business for good is actually good for business, right? And there's this lovely circular thing going on. So it's a very, very, very special time for all sorts of innovations, bearing in mind that we're now seeing the issues that we created. And there's some little people there saying, hey, listen, we need to fix this. So let's do it together. So I think it's a very special time.
Lisa, you want to come in?
Yes, I'd like to pick up on what Philip said there, that we went through a period of transparency, requiring transparency. I think that shifted even further over the past 2 years. I think we moved from transparency to more almost combining that with introspection. It's not just what we are expecting of others, it's what we're expecting of ourselves now, what's important to us. And that brings a whole new flavor to everything. But in conjunction with that, I want to say that I think it shouldn't be a black and white situation of, well, if you're only talking about the money side, it's bad, you need to only talk about the other side. It is a holistic thing. You know, business, I do believe, is going to be the key factor that is going to bring change in the world. So you need to make money, you need to actually be profitable so that you can leverage that. But I think that's the key thing, is how do you use that power that gives you? And it's not just about the money, it's about how did you get there? What's the value you're providing? How are you giving back? How are you collaborating? So it becomes this holistic thing. So we shouldn't throw out the money part, but it is how you actually move forward with it and use the power that it gives you, and doing it in a way that you are really introspective about what really is important to you, what's important to those around you, and how do we build a future that collaborates those two things. So I think, Rian, I would like to hear how you see it from a children's perspective. How would they see this debate?
Well, I just think, as Paul was just saying then as well, just very powerful, just in terms of the inspirational kind of discussion that has been inspired by COP26 and those global thought leaders of young people actually driving change, really driving change in terms of speaking out and really engaging in a very mature way with the leaders of our world and saying, actually, now we need to be doing something. We need to be doing something right now. We can't wait any longer. And I think it's a real moment. And I think all of us have been saying that on the panel today, that this is a real moment in time. We've hit two major, what I would call global emergencies, and people are really starting to respond to it right across sectors. And Annalise, as you say, that, you know, we have to do this together. It is also about generating business, generating kind of income for communities as well. But it's also making sure, as John was saying earlier, that we really consider all the environmental impacts of our business decisions, the impacts on children, the impacts on everyone, the impacts on future generations. And then we can really successfully, as the topic of the discussion is today, rise together in a way that really improves people's lives, but we can create profit as well. So yeah, I think it's very difficult, challenging times, and I've been really upset over the last year and the research I'm doing to see some of the really negative impacts on children. So I think it's great to be here with inspirational leaders like yourself and really consider how we can work together to create positive change. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. If I may just share this little story, I run a portal called Go Green. I've been doing it for about 12 years. And how it started was I read in the local newspaper here in Dubai, which is called Gulf News. It said that UAE as a country had the highest carbon footprint in the world. And that got me thinking, UAE is normally known for the biggest, the largest, in terms of the tallest building, the largest mall, and whatever else. And here UAE was a big culprit, literally the last in terms of offsetting carbon footprint. So I thought, okay, what can I do to make a difference? And so I decided to start a portal called go-green.ae. I'll put it in the chat for those who are interested. It's been running for 12 years now. So what I'm doing here is running a Go Green Ambassadors program. It's a voluntary program. Anybody can register. We started locally first in Dubai. We grew in UAE, then in Middle East. Now it's gone global. So we today have 16,000 Go Green ambassadors who sign up and say they have 1 hour a week or 2 hours a month to spare. So I've got this great database going of volunteers. And on the other side, I have organizations, nonprofits, and even for-profit organizations who need volunteers when they run different programs, such as on Earth Day or Earth Hour, or it could be a beach cleanup. So what I do is I post on the website what events are happening and what volunteers are required. And it is, amazing. People are joining in throngs. They are sharing their stories. And, one thing that comes across very clearly is that the children are taking the lead. And Dr. Rian, you'll be happy to know that a lot of parents tell me that children tell their dads and moms, please close the light when you leave the room. Please close your computer, right? So I think children are involved. They are sharing their stories. And I also might refer to that great resignation talk that's going on. I, dared last weekend to go through that whole report. And what came out quite clearly also is stunning, that people now are going to decide which organizations they are going to work for, right? And one of the criteria they are judging organizations is in terms of what they are giving back. What are they doing to make this world a better place? So I think it's a wake-up call for all leaders to start doing things that can be seen by all and that have measurable impacts and that are put out on their website for all to read. Talking of transparency. So I would say all organizations need to have a tab on their website other than their profile, vision, mission, purpose, services, activities, teams. One tab which specifically says, what have you done, to make the world a better place? Do my panelists agree on this idea?
Well, yeah, I mean that's one of the things that we give people, but it's really interesting too, because sometimes it's very easy sometimes to look at governments. Philip and I were talking about politicians later on as to why they took so long to decide who the new chancellor would be, but there's some really interesting things happening. For example, in the United Kingdom, about 18 months ago, what happened was the government said, if you would like to bid for government tenders, then we are going to evaluate you out of 100, and we're going to, pass mark is like 83 or something like that, and 10% of those marks are going to be put there as a result of the measurement that you are making in terms of the impact, the positive impact that you're having on your community. Now, that was 18 months ago. Today, in certain government departments in the United Kingdom, that mark is not 10% anymore, it's 40%. So it's a 40% thing, as you've got to be doing this stuff, which goes back to what John Scott was saying, that it's really, there are so many things now sort of pulling or pushing leaders to say, hang on guys, we're watching what's going on here. And so there is really very little choice but to get on board and do things. Yeah. So, you know, I just think there's, as you said earlier on, John Scott, there's just so much going on, which is giving us the guideposts as to where we should be going.
John Scott, I want to ask you, when you are talking to leaders, you know, to your clients, do you see a conscious effort being made by them to up their image in terms of what they stand for?
In a simple sense, yes. I think some of it is a pull, and some of it is a push. So I think you know, some of them are reacting to a bit of consciousness momentum within their organizations and community at large, and some are having to be led a little bit more directly towards those initiatives. I think what I said earlier is really relevant, because I think that what's happening is there's a tendency now to say, well, how does this impact the team? So it starts out small, right? So it starts out, whereas, hate to reference our own webinars, but you know, our webinar yesterday, it starts out where, you know, we're looking at this as terms of, I'm the leader, let me set the direction, the tone, and make the decisions, and everyone will implement what I do. I've always believed, and my work is always centered around a collective intelligence and how going together is always a better way to go. I think now people who I may have had a bit more of a challenge with a year or two ago are more receptive to that dialogue. So to your point, yes, I think people are looking at it a bit more consciously. I think that there's a shift happening from people who may have not felt it was organizationally appropriate, or they didn't feel as if it was something they had the courage to embrace. Because that's a big central point and theme of my work, is leadership courage. I believe now the courage is really very clearly laid out, the courageous path, in terms of engaging your teams, driving innovation, new ways of working, and really being open to the collective and new ways of thinking. It's an easier and less, I think, intense decision-making process now, because I think the momentum for change, this is one of the things I hesitantly refer to as like the gifts of COVID. You know, there's the momentum of change, and I think that there's less risk for leaders to say, you know, well, what's a new way of looking at this? What's a new way of doing this? How can we engage our teams? How can we look at our community? How we look at our impact and where we are, both in terms of the communities, cultures, people, environment, so many, you know, everything. So I think that's all in the mix right now. So I'm curious, going back to you, how do you see this unfolding in particular the market that you're living in now in Singapore? Do you see this from a leadership perspective and organizational perspective for you there?
Oh, very much so. Oh, yeah, very much so. You know, the when you look at, for example, if you look at the SDGs, right, the global goals, the sovereign fund of Singapore said, first of all, we're only going to invest now in impact-driven projects. That's what we're doing, right? And they've had that now for 3 years. They've also realized something interesting, which was, they didn't say this directly, but they said it sort of indirectly, that when the people designed the global goals, no marketing people were involved. There's just these 17 numbers, and you know, it's kind of hard to get together. So they've now done a little thing. I'll find a link later on where you can actually change it, change all the position of the goals around, and you get it in an ABC format, where A stands for active economy, B stands for, and there's lots of those, B stands for beautiful society. So it talks about gender equality, all those sorts of things. And then the C down the bottom, not surprisingly, stands for clean air. And it's really very cool. So there's a lot of stuff there going on, and we see SDG things everywhere and so on. But interestingly too, I was in Lithuania 2 years ago, before flying was kind of verboten, and I noticed, at the airport, there's global goal signs all over the airport. Oh, how cool. So, but I think, as you were saying right at the start, John Scott, that there is now this acceleration. At last, we're getting traction. And our responsibility, I think, is to just increase that traction and laud it wherever we see it. And understand as well that I like what Patagonia said recently. For example, Patagonia, when you look at Patagonia as a company, here's the guy who developed 1% for the planet, right? He's the guy, right? Yeah. And when you look at Patagonia, you go, oh my God, they've got to be the world's most sustainable company. With all of it, you may have noticed last week they said, no. We are not going to let anybody use the word sustainable about me or about us, because we've got to fix the issues in the supply chain as well before we can actually call ourselves sustainable. So what we're seeing now, I think, and Paul Polman's book called Netpositive is a very interesting treatise in how you leverage all of this stuff from CEO to CEO to CEO to CEO, if that makes sense. And I think that's, again, one of the really encouraging things that's going on right now.
You want to weigh in?
Actually, I think, I love that we kind of ping-pong back and forth between the external and the internal, right? Because I think John Scott set us up for both. And then Paul, you could talk about how we can actually see these changes happening there. And I think the other thing we're also seeing it is on the internal side, that there's now examples available of leaders who are now more vulnerable, who are, because of the situation, have to be more vulnerable. So it's okay to be vulnerable. And as a first step to courage, right? Before I can be courageous, I have to be vulnerable and I have to allow to say, I don't know, let's find out together. And I don't know. And I think we're seeing more and more, if you look at, HBR, and if you look at some of the business publications, it's full of talks on empathy and full of talks on how to connect with your team in a real human way. And there's a bit of a conflict going on right now, because I think the aspirational self is more and more in that direction, right? People are saying we have to have a people, planet kind of first company. And then there's still also some natural stress behaviors that when we fall back into our, oh shit, I need to make my numbers kind of behaviors, and we look where we can cut cost, right? And so I think there's a bit of a discrepancy that's maybe even bigger than I've seen it in the past, right? Because we have that new thing now, and we all know we can't say we didn't know, right? That we are impacting people on the planet with our activities. So we have to at least begin to have that conversation. Sometimes we're down to the purpose word being a very bullshit word, that happens as well. But at least there's that hope to go there. And now we have to figure out, who are we when we're stressed, right? I mean, this is a whole kind of assessment centers, right? Like, who am I when I'm falling back to my default amygdala behaviors? Am I going back to escapism or to delusion or to blaming, or am I going back to these kind of behaviors? And I think that's where the exciting tension is on an internal level right now, right? Where we really, and I think with Corona having sent us home to think about what we did, I think it's been a lot of insight, and there's not by chance that 2/3 of employees have looked up purpose last year, and there's a great resignation where 40% are considering quitting their job right now, because they are looking to say, I want to do something more meaningful. I can't say I didn't know anymore. I need to somehow at least integrate that into my behavior.
Oh, I love that. That's a super point, Philip, on courage and vulnerability. The link between those, super point. Super good.
Actually, it doesn't go to me. That credit goes to Brené Brown. She's awesome when it comes to empathy.
Oh yeah, well, Brené.
The beautiful
Brené did write a book about it,
right, where she talks about how if we want to have courage, the first step, and even a lot of Navy SEALs and people talk about that as well, where they say, hey, dude, it's not that we don't have fear, right? And we have to be vulnerable with each other. We have to say, I don't know. We have to say, I need support. And we have to say, can we do this together, right? And this is I think, where we have more and more role models and examples that's okay. Boys are allowed to cry now, kind of thing.
So
Lisa, you want to comment? Yeah, I want to ask
an interesting point, Philip.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say something really simple, which is, people often ask me, what's the singular point that I think demonstrates competent and courageous leadership? And I thought about this for a moment, and you just sparked it, Philip, in my mind. I think it's when leaders say 3 words, which is, I don't know. I don't know. I think there's this push for leadership to be omnipotent. And I think there's permission, particularly in the last 2 years, for this is a whole new environment for so many people. So they're grouping in maybe some legacy behaviors, legacy organizational issues that they're saying, well, let's take a step back and look at a new way of doing this. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. What do you think?
That's right. The 4 words afterwards. 4 words afterwards. What do you think? Yeah.
And it starts with our children. I'll come back to Ryan here, right? Because it starts with how we educated our children and how we have been in this factory education model where we raise experts. And the one who knows the most, who has the doctor, not to dismiss that in any way, right? But who knows the most, who's the expert, they're allowed to say something about something, right? And that's how you rise to the top. And the boss has to know the answers because they're the expert. Right? And I think that has shifted now because that was kind of true in a semi-predictable environment, but it's not true in an environment of uncertainty where nobody knows. Right? And so this expert, we've trained our children to be experts and then later achievers who can drive KPIs. And now we need the next level of leader, which is a transformational leader, right? That can say, I don't know, like you're saying, John Prescott, like who can say, I don't know, let's find out together, let's transform together, let's experiment who we could become, to bring it back to your quote from the, get-go here, Shrug.
Yeah, I just want to, go ahead, Dr. Rehan.
Just to pick up on that great point, because out of vulnerability does come brilliant courage. And just in terms of kind of thinking about children have been speaking out on various issues across these two global emergencies that have been going on. And there was a child speaking at another webinar the other day with really big duty bearers, from the UN down to other kind of advocates within their own country context. And they said they were so scared before getting on that platform to actually speak out about what they believed in. And then their message to everybody else was, if you're scared, just do it anyway. Just get up there and really talk about what you believe in. And I just thought that was so powerful coming from, that was a little 10-year-old in Scotland. It was just really, really impressive. So
thanks for that. Not growing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also like to ask Annalisa, you are building this beautiful community or global village. What is the feedback that you are getting both from your members who are helping you build it and from the outsiders? What do they think about what you are doing? I know you're putting in a lot of time into building this community ground up, right? When I joined you, I guess 3 months back, it was the foundation was being laid, and almost every week I receive notifications from social media, Facebook, from Annalisa. She has done this and she has done that. So I see you building bridges instead of building walls, and I see you involving people. It's a curated community. So share with us, with our panelists and the audience, what your vision is. Where do you see your community going? What are the challenges you have faced building it? And what are the opportunities that you see going forward? Over to you, Annalisa.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for that, Sharad. Yes, indeed, it has been an interesting period of building from the ground up, but it is very much about, I come back to the village concept. The village is such a beautiful term because it has so much meaning inherent to it. It is about the collaboration. It is about, let's do this together. It's about curating things that matter to everybody. And the interesting time that we're in is that there is just so much opportunity going forward. We have the technology. We have a new way of looking at life. We look at I talked about the introspection. It brought up a consciousness for everybody. It's about building what we all believe could be better. And what the metaverse gives us is it just makes it so much easier because you can build whatever you want it to look like. You're not constrained by anything. You're only constrained by your imagination. And that's the beautiful thing of it. And the feedback that we've been getting in building this metaverse is just that there's almost a sense of relief of this is the way that life could look like, and we can create it together. You're not held back by the constraints of history, your society, where you came from, your traditions. This can be what you want it to be. And I think that gives us all the space to start imagining what we want tomorrow to look like. And I want to come back to what I read in Ray Dalio's book. He wrote this fantastic book called The Changing World Order. Now, it's a very sobering read, which really brings home the point that what we've seen over the past 500 years, those inflection points where things change, we're seeing it now again. But what he brought to the fore is that if you look at history, time and time again, the positive outcomes came from those points where people came together to find what was the best for everybody. And I think that's where we need to go with this conversation, with the communities we built, the aspirations we have. is to not fall back on our natural tendency of withdrawing and creating divisive engagements, but rather to see what brings us together. What is that one thing that we have in common that we can build upon? It's not going to be perfect for everybody, but let's focus on that part. And I hope that just in closing on that whole point is what Philip said is there's the aspirational versus what we fall back onto. I really hope that we can all hold that vision of the aspiration has to absolutely be the dominant one that's going to pull us forward, because that is what is going to change everything for the better for us and help us out of this crisis and into a world that looks very different. So Rian, I know you're nodding your head there. I think the children has that same sense of anything is possible, isn't that so?
Sorry. No, definitely. I mean, that's very inspiring, what you were saying there, just in terms of kind of reinforcing that concept of the global village and global connections and bringing everybody together. I think we're at a major moment in history, actually, in terms of history of the planet, sorry to be so very sort of grandiose, but we're at a real disruption moment. And I think it's now is an opportunity that we can come collectively together to create real change and bring everybody together. So thank you very much for that, Annelies. That was really powerful.
It's already doing it. I don't know if you know, but the largest human collaboration so far it's Wikipedia, right? In terms of the most people contributing to it. The second largest is the manual to World of Warcraft. That is a computer game. And it doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter exactly how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're a boy or girl, right? You have a username and you can participate and you can contribute. And I think that the next generation actually already understands that they now have technologies available to them that allow them to participate and contribute in society and create impact here, no matter where they are, no matter what their gender is, no matter what their skin color is, no matter what their nation is. Right? They're already getting this. They're actually living in that world much more so already than most of the adults still, who are like, do I have to do this in an email? Right? They're already getting a collaboration on that grand scale much more than we do. And I think that gives me actually personally a lot of hope, because they make things happen, right, in a much quicker way than us trying to make this happen for business or politics, even worse, right, or for some of these very slow institutions.
Yeah, and you made the point there on the chat that it also is about failing. I think more and more people are understanding that the power of any idea is only ever in its implementation. So it's not, it's not sort of thinking about exactly, oh, let's try this. Let's try this together and just see what happens. That sort of thing. And we're at this, very exciting moment as we head into 2022, I think.
Also, I'd like to, talk about a little bit about technology, how that is accelerating the formation of communities. So as some of you might know, my day job is called Cyber Gear. It's an internet services company I started a good 25 years back. And what I am hearing from some of my clients is that, their speed of interaction is increasing, their speed of response is increasing, because if you look at a typical customer today, he can shout out, on Facebook, and 2 minutes later on Twitter, then on Clubhouse. So, leaders have to be very agile and very quick to adapt. So you cannot work at that old snail space anymore, because technology has enabled people, right? Everybody is a journalist. Everybody has a camera, and they can immediately take a photograph and it can go viral on social media. So I think it's technology as an enabler has also is a double-edged sword in many ways, in that organizations have to wake up and move very fast, at the speed of lightning, really, as they say, or the speed of thought, because you have to be faster than the speed of your clients, right? So I find that's another big challenge. And also in terms of community building, I was talking to a platform called Rebel Base, actually introduced to me by John Scott. And that's a great community building exercise. What they are doing is they are having educational institutions creating their communities on their platform, and it's global. So you could be an institution in New York, and you could be connected to a university in Spain, for example. And there's a lot of conversations happening. So for example, startups need a mentor or they need a VC. You don't have to source it locally in your marketplace. You can get access to international communities. So I think technology is also a great enabler in terms of community building, and has created so many more opportunities. And a lot of software now is, plug and play, and pay as you go kind of thing. So you don't have to anymore spend an arm and a leg to get into the technology sphere. It's pretty much available online, download, and you can use. So I encourage our audience also to come up with any questions that they might have, because we are close to the 60 minutes mark. I do want to take one or two more questions from the audience before we wrap up. But again, let's just go around the room, and I'd love to hear your closing remarks. Again, on the topic specifically, on Together We Can Rise. So what are your closing remarks on what you think we need to do individually to make a difference? I know all of you, our leaders, are already doing a lot, but just your closing remarks. And I'd like to start with Philip, because you are next on my screen at least. Philip?
Sure. I mostly want to invite all of us to this practice of really thinking about this paradox of separation and oneness, right? That we're all alone by ourselves. And if it's to be, it's up to me, right? Each of us is that center origin point of creating the future. And we are inexplicably connected to everything else, right? And so it is not an either or, it's not profit or purpose, it's not alone or together, it is yes and, right? And I think really that rise of humanity and rising together to a great extent is about rising together inside of you with all the paradoxical nature that we have, and all the contradictions and all the humanness and all the confusion that comes with that, but to really celebrate that as the engine of evolution, right? That diversity and divergence and chaos is part of what continues to improve the orders that we have here.
Great. Dr. Rehan?
Yes, thank you. I found this really inspiring today. I really have. And I think just what Paul was saying earlier as well, it's about seizing the moment and make sure you have the courage that Philip was saying, in terms of translating your ideas into reality and really making the most of the situation at the moment. But in doing that, I'm really concerned about considering how all our decisions and our actions affect children and also future generations. So we can encapsulate that way of thinking into these great business ideas, into this great global village that Annalise is talking about, then I really think that we're going to make a big difference. And I'm really excited about that. So thank you very much, Sharad.
Sure. Paul?
Oh, my big takeaway, I actually put it on the chat, thank you, Philip, was I don't know. I mean, I do know what my takeaway is, but the whole issue of I don't know, what do you think? And I also have learnt recently the power of story. And it was Steve Jobs who said, the storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda for an entire generation yet to come. And in some ways, we think, oh, that's really cool, because Jobs was a storyteller, a great storyteller. But sometimes we seem to forget that he was actually a story creator, and he gave us new stories to tell. And I think each one of us working together, together, just think about the words for a second. Together we can rise. Looking at that kind of interesting thing that Philip was talking about a minute ago. And the reality is that together we can create, not just tell, we can create new stories, which and then help others to change up their stories. And one of the things that I absolutely know now, having sort of every second word that comes out of my mouth these days seems to be the word story. I was impressed by the only guy I think in the world who's older than me, Sir David Attenborough, when he looked at opened COP26, and he said that if by working apart we can completely destabilize our planet, surely together we can do great things to rescue things. And by the way, interestingly, in that 7-minute speech of his, he used the word story 11 times. And so I think we're understanding, just from what Philip just said a moment ago, it is all about not just the telling, but the creation of the story, and then doing that together with lots of different inputs and so on. So Philip, thank you for that big input on me today. I'm going to practice that tomorrow. Oh, what should we do? I don't know. What do you think? I think that so many more things. And again, the vulnerability, because I think was it Dr. Yan who said, someone said, we're expected to be the experts, but that's no longer valid anyway. So again, great discussion, and hopefully of value for the people. Thank you, by the way, everybody, for joining us. Just been great.
Yeah, John Scott, and then we'll give the last word to Annalisa. John Scott?
I think we've been saying this in so many different ways, shapes, and forms over this last time. And I think my last thought on this is, I believe that courage is critical, but taking some action, doing something. I think that there's been a historical paralysis from a leadership and societal perspective, is to hold back doing anything until we're absolutely certain that we play it all out. And Philip, I think, touched on this earlier. And there's no certainty. What is it? All life lies in uncertainty. Live immediately. So I think that really lends itself, not to go into my Seneca quotes, but going down that road. I think that this is a time for action. It's a time for heartfelt mindfulness, and I think that leadership, and hopefully the global village, to put it that way, is embracing this reality. I really do think it's happening, and it's up to us to continue to perpetuate it. So,
great. Annalisa, Plan for Impact was your idea.
Yes. Well, I have to hand it to you, Sharad. It was a collaborative effort, right? We came together and said, we don't know how we're going to do this. And that's what came about. So for me, the takeaway is, if I take the theme of today, together we can rise. I think the important thing is the we can rise part. First and foremost, we must believe we can rise. I think there's so much negativity going on around us, of people pulling apart what is wrong with our society. This is not working. I think we should just shift that slightly to say, yes, there are issues, but we can rise. It's that we can rise. And if we have that mindset, that belief that is possible, then the next part is that togetherness. Together we can create a new story that works for everybody. Together we have to come together to say we don't know. Together we must make this work for everybody. And that, I think that's why I love, Sharad, what you've chosen as a theme for today is together we can rise. There's so much to that. But first and foremost, yes, we can rise. We can actually get through this and make it better. Thank you. Thanks so much, Sharad. Thanks for everyone for joining here today. It was cool.
Absolutely. Thank you, Annalisa. And I want to close from this quote by Deepak Chopra. He says, I quote, "Giving connects two people, the giver and the receiver. And this connection gives birth to a new sense of belonging." I was fortunate enough to meet Deepak Chopra a couple of years back in Dubai. He had come here on a book signing spree. And I asked him, how do you define yourself? And he said, I'm a speck of dust in the junkyard of infinity. On that note, we will close today. I want to thank all my panelists for their contribution. I loved it. We have created great experiences, which we will cherish. I want to thank my audience for investing their 60 minutes with us, and look forward to another edition of Plan for Impact. And Lisa, we need to get started on that, and we'll announce it in the next couple of weeks, and let's agree that we'll do it in January. So I wish you in advance a very happy and prosperous new year. Stay safe, stay connected. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good to connect, Dr. Yan. Good to